The house at 38 Brymorton Drive in Scarborough, Ontario, was the kind of place that looked ordinary from the outside. A small, semi-detached brick home squeezed between two identical ones on a street where every lawn was slightly too long and every driveway had at least one car that didn't run anymore. Ethan Ryder Malik was born there on a grey March morning in 1997, the only child of a woman named Sana Malik, who worked checkout at a no-frills grocery store on Ellesmere Road, and a man named Greg Ryder, who drove a city bus for Toronto Transit Commission 6 days a week. They were not destitute. They were something almost harder to escape. They were exactly broke enough to survive, but never quite enough to move forward. The rent was always paid, but only barely. The fridge was always stocked, but only with the sale items. Christmas existed in the Malik Ryder household, but only because Sana started putting money aside in September. Ethan grew up understanding, without anyone ever saying it directly, that money in his family was not a tool. It was a threat that hung over every single dinner table conversation, every school trip permission slip, every pair of shoes that needed replacing 3 months before anyone admitted it. By the time he was 12 years old, Ethan Ryder Malik had already decided with quiet, absolute certainty that he was going to live differently. But deciding to live differently and actually knowing how to do it are two completely separate things, and what happened next nearly broke him before it built him. At 18, Ethan Ryder Malik graduated from Sir Wilfrid Laurier Collegiate Institute with decent grades and zero plan. University felt financially impossible. His parents couldn't contribute, OSAP would leave him in debt for a decade, and nobody in his family had ever gone anyway. So Ethan did what seemed logical. He got a job. His first real job was at a Canadian Tire warehouse in Scarborough, working the overnight stocking shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., earning $15.50 an hour, which was minimum wage in Ontario at the time. He would come home at 7:03 in the morning while the rest of the neighborhood was just waking up, eat cereal, standing at the kitchen counter sleep until 3 p.m. and then spend the hours before his next shift watching television or scrolling his phone in a kind of exhausted fog that felt less like living and more like waiting for something, though he couldn't have said exactly what. His first full paycheck was $589 after taxes for 2 weeks of overnight warehouse work. He held that check in his hands for a long time, not with pride, not with shame, with a very specific feeling he would later describe as the moment he understood the trap, the clean, well-lit, perfectly legal trap of trading the hours of your life for an amount of money that will never be enough to buy your freedom. That $589 paycheck wasn't just money, it was a deadline disguised as a salary, and deep down Ethan Ryder Malik already knew it. From 18 to 21, Ethan Ryder Malik worked. That is the most accurate and also the most heartbreaking way to describe those 3 years. He worked the Canadian Tire warehouse until he was 19, then switched to a construction labor job with a small Scarborough contractor named Horvath and Sons that paid $18 an hour and destroyed his lower back by lunchtime every day. He saved money, not much, but consistently, keeping a running total in a notes app on his phone that he updated every 2 weeks after each deposit. By his 21st birthday, he had $11,400 in a savings account at TD Bank, which he was enormously proud of, and which his father Greg told him was a good emergency fund. And that phrase, a good emergency fund, hit Ethan like cold water. His father had worked for TTC for 22 years. His mother had worked checkout for 17. Between them, they had spent nearly 4 decades trading their time for money, and the result was a semi-detached house in Scarborough that they didn't own, a car that needed new brakes, and a son who was now 21 years old and already feeling the familiar walls of the trap closing around him just as they had closed around his parents before him. Ethan loved his parents completely and without condition, and it was precisely that love that terrified him, because he could see his own future in their tired eyes. It was not a mentor. It was not a course. It was not a motivational video. It was a battered second-hand copy of Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki that Ethan found at a value village on Kingston Road in the summer of 2019 and paid $1299 for because the spine was cracked and someone had highlighted half the pages in yellow already. He read it in 4 days, not because it was short, but because he could not stop. He had never encountered a framework for thinking about money that matched the feeling he'd been carrying inside him since he was 12 years old, standing on the front step of 38 Brymorton Drive. The concept that hit him hardest, the one he read 3 times and then wrote down in full in his notes app at 1 a.m., was the idea that rich people buy assets, and assets are things that put money into your pocket whether you show up to work or not. He thought about his parents. He thought about the warehouse. He thought about the construction site and his aching back. And then, for the first time in his life, he thought about real estate, not as something for rich people, not as something impossibly far away, but as a mechanism, a system. Something that could be learned, entered, and used. He closed that $1.99 book at 2 a.m., set it on the mattress beside him, and felt something shift permanently inside his chest. For $1.99 at a value village in Scarborough, Ethan Ryder Malik had just purchased the single most expensive education of his life, and it was the cheapest thing he ever bought. After that night, Ethan Ryder Malik became quietly, completely obsessed. The kind of obsession that doesn't announce itself loudly but reorganizes every hour of a person's life around a single goal. He checked out every real estate investing book from the Scarborough Civic Centre library, not 1 or 2, but 14 over the course of 3 months. He watched hundreds of hours of YouTube content on Canadian real estate investing, house hacking, porridge, mortgage qualification, and Ontario landlord-tenant law. He created a spreadsheet, a detailed, color-coded, obsessively maintained spreadsheet tracking average property prices in every Toronto area neighborhood, average rental income, cap rates, and cash flow projections. He did this while still working the construction job with Horvath and Sons. He did this on his lunch breaks, sitting in a pickup truck eating a sandwich, laptop open on the seat beside him, running property listings on Realtor.ca. His co-workers thought he was strange. His parents thought it was a phase. His childhood friend Connor, who had known him since 3rd grade, told him bluntly one night at a Tim Hortons on Markham Road, "Ethan, you don't have enough money to buy real estate in Toronto. Nobody our age does." Ethan nodded, finished his coffee, and went home to update his spreadsheet. Everyone around Ethan saw the obstacles. Ethan had already started building the map around them. 6 months into his real estate education, Ethan discovered the strategy that would become his entry point into a market that everyone his age said was impossible to enter: house hacking. The concept was straightforward. Buy a multi-unit property, live in one unit, rent out the others, and let the tenants pay your mortgage. In the Toronto market of 2020, a duplex in Scarborough or the East End could still be found in the $620,000 to $750,000 range. With a 5% down payment on an owner-occupied property under $1 million, the minimum allowed under Canadian mortgage rules for a primary residence, Ethan would need approximately $31,000 to $37,000 to get in the door. He had $11,400 saved. He needed more than double that, and he needed it within a year if he wanted to catch the market before it moved further out of reach. So he made a decision that nobody around him understood. He took a second job. He kept the construction work during the day and started driving for Uber in the evenings from 6 p.m. to midnight, 4 nights a week. He stopped buying anything that wasn't food or transportation. He meal prepped on Sundays. He cancelled his phone plan and switched to a $15 a month prepaid. He lived like he was already in survival mode, because in his mind he was. While everyone his age was spending their 20s, Ethan Ryder Malik was investing his, and the difference would compound into something nobody around him could yet imagine. 14 months into his saving and planning, with $28,700 accumulated and his first property purchase within reach, Ethan's father Greg had a heart attack. It was a Tuesday morning in November 2020. Greg Ryder was 53 years old, standing at the bus depot on Eglinton Avenue getting ready for his morning shift when he collapsed. He survived. The paramedics reached him in time. But the recovery was long, the medical leave unpaid beyond 6 weeks of short-term disability, and the financial pressure on the household immediately became critical. Ethan did not hesitate. He moved back into 38 Bry Morton Drive, handed his mother $500 a month to cover the gap in household income, and watched his savings account begin to drain with a feeling he would later describe as watching a fire you spent 2 years building get rained on. By February 2021, he had $19,200 left. He did not reduce his hours. He did not stop driving Uber. He did not update his spreadsheet for 6 weeks because he couldn't bring himself to look at the revised timelines. But he also did not quit. Not once, not for a single day, did the thought of quitting actually take hold. Because every time he sat beside his father's hospital bed and looked at the man who had driven a bus for 22 years and still had nothing saved for an emergency, he felt the fire relight, harder and hotter than it had been before. The moment Ethan watched his father's savings disappear into a medical emergency was the moment he understood, with total clarity, that there was no safety net coming and he was going to have to build one himself. By August 2021, Ethan Ryder Malik was 24 years old and had rebuilt his savings to $34,500. His father was fully recovered and back to work. And on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, Ethan made an offer on a legal duplex on Dawes Road in East York, a 2-unit property listed at $649,000 that had been sitting for 18 days, which in Toronto's market meant something was wrong with it. What was wrong with it, as Ethan discovered during his inspection, was that the basement unit had water damage along one wall, outdated electrical in the main unit, and a tenant in the upper unit who was paying $950 a month, well below market rate, and had an active lease until June 2022. None of these things scared Ethan. He had spent 2 years studying exactly these kinds of problems and exactly what they were worth as negotiating leverage. He offered $611,000. The seller countered at $600,000. Ethan held at $608,000 and waited 4 days without blinking. They settled at $621,000. With 5% down on a co-signed mortgage, his father Greg co-signed, which cost Greg nothing and gave Ethan everything. Ethan moved into the basement unit of his first property, repaired the water damage himself over 3 weekends for $2,200 in materials, upgraded the electrical for $3,800 through a licensed electrician, and began renting the upper unit for $1,850 per month when the original tenant's lease expired. His mortgage payment was $2,940 per month. His tenant paid $1,850. His effective housing cost, $1,090 per month, less than he'd been paying to rent a room. At 24 years old, Ethan Ryder Malik had stopped paying someone else's mortgage and started having someone else pay his, and that single shift would change the entire trajectory of his life. Living in the basement of his Dawes Road duplex, Ethan Ryder Malik began implementing the strategy he had been studying for 2.5 years: buy, renovate, rent, refinance, repeat. The BRRRR method. Within 14 months of purchasing his first property, the combination of his renovations, the improved tenant, and Toronto's rising market had pushed the appraised value of the duplex from $621,500 to $700,000. He went back to his bank, refinanced at the new value, and pulled out $87,000 in equity, tax-free, because it was a loan against the property, not income. He used $51,000 of that equity as a down payment on a second property, a rundown triplex in Oshawa, Ontario, 45 minutes east of Toronto, listed at $409,000 now, that needed significant cosmetic work but had strong bones, and a neighborhood that Ethan's research told him was on the edge of a growth wave. He purchased it in October 2022. He renovated all 3 units over 4 months using a combination of his own labor on weekends and trusted tradespeople he had met through his construction work. By March 2023, all 3 units were rented at market rate, generating $5,400 per month in gross rental income against a mortgage payment of $2,650. Monthly cash flow, $2,750 before expenses. Ethan hadn't earned more money. He had learned how to make money move, multiply, and work through the night while he slept. Between 2021 and 2024, Ethan Ryder Malik's life looked like this from the outside. A 20-something guy living in the basement of his own rental property, driving an 8-year-old Honda Civic, wearing the same navy jacket in every photo, eating meal-prepped rice and chicken 5 nights a week. He did not go on vacations. He did not upgrade his phone when his contract ended. He did not go to the bars in the distillery district on weekends with his old Scarborough friends, not because he was antisocial, but because every dollar he wasn't spending was a dollar compounding toward the next property. What the world didn't see was the spreadsheet that now had 4 tabs and tracked 12 different financial metrics across 2 properties. What the world didn't see was the 11 p.m. phone calls with his mortgage broker working through financing structures for property number 3. What the world didn't see was the Saturday morning he drove to Hamilton, Brantford and Kitchener in a single day to view 6 properties back-to-back, eating gas station sandwiches between viewings, getting home at 10 p.m. and updating his analysis before bed. He was not suffering. He was building. And he had learned, from his father's tired eyes, from his mother's coupon-clipped grocery lists, from his own 589 paycheck at 18, that the season of building requires a specific willingness to live small so that the rest of your life can be lived fully. The people who saw Ethan Malik's results in 2025 had not seen the 1,000 quiet Saturday mornings in 2022 that made those results inevitable. By January 2024, Ethan Ryder Malik was 26 years old and owned 4 properties. The East York duplex, he still lived in the Oshawa triplex, generating $2,750 in monthly cash flow. A 2-unit property in Hamilton, purchased in mid-2023 for $398,000, generating $1,400 in monthly cash flow. And a single-family home in Kitchener he had purchased in late 2023 for $420, renovated and rented to a young family for $2,200 per month against a mortgage of $1,890. His total monthly rental income across all properties was $9,250 gross. His total mortgage obligations were $7,480 per month. His net monthly cash flow before maintenance and vacancy reserves was $1,707. Not a fortune, but it was money that arrived whether he showed up to work or not. More importantly, the equity position he had built across 4 properties, combining his down payments, his renovations, market appreciation, and mortgage paydown, had grown to approximately $580,000. He was not yet a millionaire on paper. But the trajectory was unmistakable, and the machine he had built was accelerating faster than he could have projected from that battered $199 book at Value Village 4 years earlier. He was also, for the first time in his life, considering leaving construction entirely. 4 properties. 4 income streams. One 26-year-old from Scarborough who had built in 4 years. What most people are told takes an entire lifetime, and he was just getting started. The moment Ethan Ryder Malik crossed a net worth of $1 million Canadian happened not with a celebration or a champagne bottle. It happened on a Tuesday evening in March 2024 when he sat at his desk, opened his net worth tracking spreadsheet, updated the appraised values of all 4 properties based on recent comparable sales data, subtracted his total mortgage balances, and stared at a number that read 1,047,300. He was 26 years old. He was sitting in the basement unit of his first property on Dawes Road in East York. He was wearing a plain navy jacket. He had eaten meal-prepped chicken and rice for dinner. He called his mother Sana first. She was silent for almost 30 seconds on the phone before she said, in Urdu, something that translated roughly to, "Your grandfather would have been so proud." He called his father Greg second. Greg, who had co-signed the mortgage on Ethan's first property 3 years earlier, the small act of faith that had cost Greg nothing and given his son everything, simply said, I knew Ethan. I always knew. And Ethan, who had not allowed himself to fully feel the weight of any of this until that moment, sat alone at that desk in that basement and let himself cry for exactly 4 minutes. Then he opened a new tab and started researching property number 5. The $1 million was never really the goal. It was simply the proof that the boy from 38 Brymorton Drive had been right about everything all along. 3 days after crossing the $1 million mark, Ethan Ryder Malik did something he had been quietly planning for over a year. He drove to the No Frills on Ellesmere Road, the same grocery store where his mother Sana had worked checkout for 19 years, and he walked inside at 2 p.m. on a Friday afternoon and found her at her register. She saw him come through the door and smiled with the particular smile reserved for unexpected good things. He walked up, waited for her customer to finish, and then slid a folded piece of paper across the conveyor belt. It was a printed screenshot of a transfer confirmation, $3,500 deposited into her account that morning, with a recurring monthly transfer set up for the same amount starting the following month. Sana Malik unfolded the paper, read it twice, looked up at her son and said, "Ethan, I can't." He put his hand over hers on the conveyor belt and said, "You already did. You did it for 18 years. Let me do this part." She went on, break 10 minutes later. They sat together in the break room, the same kind of institutional break room where Ethan had once eaten cereal before overnight warehouse shifts, and she held his face in both hands the way she had when he was 12 years old, and did not say anything, because nothing needed to be said. The real measure of Ethan Malik's success was never a number on a spreadsheet. It was the moment his mother got to go on break and not come back. By mid-2024, Ethan Ryder Malik had quit the construction job entirely. His rental portfolio, now 5 properties across Toronto, Oshawa, Hamilton and Kitchener, was generating enough cash flow and being professionally managed enough that he had both the time and the growing credibility to do something he had been thinking about for years. He began hosting free Saturday morning real estate workshops at the Scarborough Civic Centre Library, the same library where he had checked out 14 books on investing for young people aged 18 to 25 from Scarborough and the East End of Toronto. He charged nothing. He brought his laptop, his spreadsheets, his actual purchase contracts with the numbers redacted, and he sat with groups of 12 to 20 people every other Saturday and walked them through exactly what he had done and exactly how they could begin. His childhood friend, Connor, who had once told him over Tim Hortons that nobody their age could afford Toronto real estate, attended the 3rd session and later that year made an offer on a duplex in Oshawa. Ethan co-signed the mortgage. 3 months after Connor's purchase, Ethan received a text message from him that simply said, "Tenant paid first month. This is real." Ethan read that text standing in the basement of his Dawes Road property and smiled so wide that he had to sit down. The most powerful thing Ethan Ryder Malik ever built wasn't a real estate portfolio. It was proof that the door he had walked through was wide enough for everyone who was willing to learn how to find it. Ethan Ryder Malik turned 27 years old on a grey March morning, 27 years after he was born in a semi-detached brick house on Brymorton Drive in Scarborough, where money was a threat that hung over every meal. His net worth at 27 stood at 1,340 Jew Owl 0, 5 properties. A mother who no longer had to work, a father who had been able to reduce his TTC shifts to 3 days a week, a childhood friend building his own portfolio, and a Saturday morning library workshop that was now regularly oversubscribed with a waiting list. He did not own a luxury car. He still drove the Honda Civic. He still wore the navy jacket. He had recently moved out of his basement unit on Dawes Road into a clean 2-bedroom apartment in Leslieville, his first real home that wasn't a renovation project, and on the night he moved in, he sat on the floor of the empty living room before the furniture arrived and thought about the boy who used to stand on the front steps of 38 Brymorton Drive, staring down the street with quiet, certain, unreasonable eyes. That boy had never been naive. He had simply understood something, young and early and with perfect clarity. that most people spend their entire lives being talked out of, that where you start is not where you have to finish, and the only permission you ever actually needed was the one you gave yourself. The boy from Brymorton Drive didn't become a millionaire by accident. He became one because he decided, at 12 years old, that the life he was born into was not the life he was going to live, and he never once let himself forget it.